Good morning. I'm Dave Deken with a look at what's happening in Oklahoma agriculture and rural life in this episode of Red Dirt and Round Bales. You know, there are some questions in ranching that sound simple until you try to answer them honestly. One of them is always how much grazing pressure is too much. Not how many cows can you squeeze into a pasture. Not what that place carried back in the wet year. Not what is your neighbor doing across the fence. But what can this pasture handle right now with the grass it has, the rain it got, the animals you're running, and the recovery time it needs? That's a different question. And it's one that Dr. Laura Goodman with Oklahoma State University spends a lot of time helping producers think through. Grazing pressure is really just the relationship between mouths and grass. How much forage is out there? How much of it can safely be used? How many animals are eating it? How long are they staying? But like most things on the land, it's not quite as neat as it sounds on paper. We all know that cattle don't graze a pasture like a lawnmower. They pick and they choose. They go where the good grass is. They gather near water, shade, mineral, and gates. They'll use one part of the pasture hard while another part looks almost untouched. That means a pasture can be overgrazed in spots, even if the whole place doesn't look overstocked from the road. And that's where the work starts. You've got to walk the pasture. You've got to look at what's being used, what's being left, and what kind of plants are coming back after grazing. A good pasture leaves evidence. So does a tired one. Bare ground tells a story. Short grass tells a story too. And of course, weeds moving in tell a bigger story, as does cattle walking further between bites. Now here's where Dr. Goodman's work gives us a wider lens. Because when we talk about grazing pressure, we're not just talking about cattle. We're talking about the whole rangeland system: grass, trees, water, soil, and time.
It's difficult to provide rest, but also have quality. And so, that's why our patch burning system has worked so well, is because we're taking we've got multiple years of rest before we burn something, and then we burn it, and that's what draws the grazing. And so, and you can do that on a full pasture too. You could burn off the whole pasture, and then everything is going to be higher quality, and they're not going to have to graze the older, dormant grass that is, 4% crude protein and really, really horrible digestibility,
And that's worth sitting with for a second. Because grazing pressure is not always about what disappears into a cow. It's also about what stays behind. Enough leaf regrowth, enough cover to protect the soil, enough root system to catch the rain when it finally comes. That old phrase, take half, leave half, well, it gets used a lot in grazing conversations, but it can also be misleading if we don't slow down and really think about it. You don't really get to use half of the grass for livestock. Some forage is trampled. Some is actually used by wildlife and insects. Some needs to stay there to feed the plant, shade the ground, and protect the soil. So determining grazing pressure really starts with a pretty plain-spoken inventory. How much forage do I have? That might mean clipping and weighing forage. It might mean using a grazing stick. It might mean using a trained eye, records from the past years, rainfall, and good, honest pasture walks. Then you ask, how much forage can I use without hurting the stand? Then the next question is, how much do these animals need? A cow-calf pair, a dry cow, a stalker, and a bull, well, they don't ask the same thing from the pasture. A head count alone doesn't tell the whole story. 50 head in May is not the same thing as 50 head in August. 50 head after a good spring rain is not the same as 50 head after a dry winter and a hot wind. The calendar matters. The cattle matter. The grass matters. And the rest period may matter most of all. Because overgrazing is not grazing too many animals. Sometimes it's grazing too long. Sometimes it's coming back too soon. Sometimes it's letting the cattle hammer the same draw, creek, shade line until the best plants lose their place. And sometimes, as Dr. Goodman points out, the thing hurting the pasture may not be the cattle at all.
The goal when we're setting a stocking rate is to use about 25% of the available productivity. So if it's 4,000 pounds per acre that you're growing, you're going to claim 1,000 pounds of that to go into the cow. About 1,000 will be lost to the environment or go back into the soil or whatever, and then 50% remains with the plant. And so that's what we call harvest efficiency. And so when we do our stocking rates, that's what we would use.
That's a good reminder. A rancher trying to determine grazing pressure has to look at the whole picture. Maybe a pasture just needs fire, rest, brush control, cross-fencing, or a different rotation. That's why the answer is rarely just run fewer cows, though sometimes that is the answer. The better question is, what is the land telling me? If the good grasses are getting shorter every year, that's a sign. If cattle are repeatedly grazing regrowth before plants recover, that's a sign. If bare ground is increasing, we'll take that as a sign. If water runs off instead of soaking in, that's a sign. If the pasture greens up after a rain, but never seems to build strength, that's a sign too. We all know that Oklahoma ranchers live in a place where the sky kind of gets a vote. Some years the grass comes easy. Some years it doesn't come at all. And in those dry years, grazing pressure gets heavier even if you never add a single animal. Same number of cows, less forage. That math catches up fast. So good grazing is part arithmetic and part listening. You count the animals, you estimate the forage, you figure grazing days, you watch utilization, you keep records. And then you walk out there and you see if the pasture agrees with your math. Because a spreadsheet can help you make a plan, but the grass will tell you whether or not the plan is working. That's the thing about grazing pressure. It's not just a measurement. It's a relationship between cattle and grass, between today's needs and next year's recovery, between making a living and keeping the land available to make one. A good pasture is not just acres under a fence. Think of it as a living account. Every bite is a withdrawal, and every rest is a deposit. And every good decision leaves something for tomorrow. To learn more about our chat with Dr. Laura Goodman, visit reddirtandroundbales.com. I'm Dave Deken. Join me tomorrow as we take a look at rural life and agriculture in Oklahoma on Red Dirt and Round Bales.